We're here to talk about juvenile violence today. Can you just tell me again just about your morning?
Yeah, I just barely got here because we admitted a 20-year-old kid that came in desperately ill after being stabbed, and this is not unusual.
Just a few days ago, Baltimore surpassed 100 homicides. Even more people have been shot and survived. Many of them have come through your doors.
It's true.
What has the year been like so far?
It's been about the same as last year, I think, which was not so good. And the violence is, to me, is not really. We've not really seen a substantial decrease in it. Certainly doesn't feel like we've had a substantial decrease in it. And it's as I said, it's just part of every day of our lives, and it's not a very good part of every day of our lives.
What are you guys seeing?
Well, I think we haven't seen a change, but I think what's more disturbing is the number of kids that are either dying as a result of gunshot or being injured as a result of a gunshot. And I think, to me, this is probably and should be the major public health issue in this country that needs to be addressed, and addressed very quickly.
You know, in general pediatrics, we spend a lot of our time focused on prevention and helping families through hard experiences. So what's important to realize is that while this is affecting so many youth and young adults, this is also affecting so many young children who are witnessing violence, who are witnessing all of the trauma that comes along with all of the violence that they're seeing in neighborhoods and in their families. And so we are seeing some of the effects even in the youngest kids in terms of how they're learning, how they're experiencing interacting with other children at school and in their neighborhoods. And so a lot of what we're focused on right now is how to weigh into their resilience, because a lot of families truly do have that resilience to build upon, and our goal is to help them to work through there.
We've really sort of normalized this. When something terrible happens, you go, well, it was only two. And you go, wait a minute, that's crazy. That we think it's okay because only two kids got hurt this week, or two anythings.
And do you think that the kids that are coming in are immune to the violence? They deal with it every single day in their lives.
I don't think there's such thing as a child being immune to violence. I think it affects how they view the world and the safety that they should be able to feel in their immediate surroundings, in their schools, in their homes. So I don't think any family truly becomes immune to it. But I think that unfortunately what we're seeing is a lot of kids do adjust and change what they do and how they interact with the world around them accordingly.
Dr. Scalea, last year you said that you and your staff were feeling beaten down. Are you still feeling that way?
Absolutely. It's just so discouraging, the violence in general. You can fix distracted driving and all of those things, and there will still be vehicular crashes because there's human error, there's weather, there's all of those things. But I don't know where it's written down that you have to pick up a gun and shoot somebody. That doesn't have to be. And so this is, as far as I'm concerned, these are 100% preventable injuries. 100% preventable.
Why do you think it's happening?
Listen, there are many people much smarter than me, two of them are sitting next to me, that have spent a lot of time trying to help us unlock why it's happening, and I certainly don't know. I do know it's a terrible problem. I do know that we haven't done anything so far that has had any measurable effect on it. And I personally believe it has to do with this culture that is now part of Baltimore. It's accepted that people are going to get shot. And we had a young kid come in and die yesterday, 2 days ago, with a gunshot wound, and went down and talked to his parents. And as I have remarked before, they're very sad, they're very grief-stricken, but they're not surprised.
We talk to families of gun violence victims all the time, and we see a similar thing. They're not shocked. They know what their kids have been into on the streets. But still, what is that like for you on a daily basis or, on a weekly basis, having to tell families, mothers, fathers, their children are gone?
Yeah, it is the worst thing that I do. I can tell you the number of steps it is from the TRU to the waiting room. And it's just so discouraging. And as I age and get closer to my own death, it has affected me more and more and more, not less.
Why do you think they're not surprised?
I think that they know that this is possible. There was a study out of Hopkins a number of years ago, the Hopkins neighborhood, and our neighborhood is going to be the same. 2/3 of the mothers had met diagnostic criteria for PTSD. And the quote that I'll never forget was this mother who said, "Every time the phone rings, I think it's going to be somebody telling me my son is dead."
Wow.
That's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, as a parent myself, our worst fear is something happening to our children. And I can't imagine knowing that there's an increased risk because I live in Baltimore. You've publicly condemned the violence several times before, and like I said, we know it affects you personally. How does it affect you guys?
Well, I think it makes our jobs very hard. There's a long-term impact of this on the families and on the children. So it's not just the child, but living with a child who might have been injured, the physical, the mental health issues. These are long-term for the child, but also for the entire family. And it has an impact on their entire family dynamic. It has an impact on really the health and welfare of the whole family. And one thing I think we can agree on is that the children are innocent in this. Regardless of what your politics are, the children are innocent. And we need to recognize this, and everyone has to figure out what they can do, regardless of how small or big, to advocate, to support causes that, if you're interested in mental health, focus on mental health, focus on suicide prevention, focus on gun safety. But every person living in Baltimore and the state of Maryland, regardless of how they feel about these issues, needs to recognize that we have an obligation and we have to start to make a difference, even if it's small steps.
And I think along those lines, we have to think about destigmatizing the conversations about guns. We have a lot of hesitancy about asking about where guns are stored, how they're stored, how do we keep them out of the hands of young adults and certainly out of children. And I think this is a conversation that everybody should be a lot more open to having in the coming weeks and months if we're going to start to make a difference. We know that there are ways to keep guns stored safely, to be locked up with ammunition stored separately that is also locked up. It is absolutely appropriate for pediatricians to be asking about gun storage in visits, so I encourage families to be open to having those conversations with their pediatricians to make sure that however guns are near their home, that they're being stored safely, and also to make sure that where their kids are spending time have safe storage of any guns that might have access as well, because that's a really important question that parents often hesitate to ask about.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. Without you guys, without shock trauma, we know the team is amazing, the survival rate is amazing. Where would Baltimore be? How much higher would the homicide count be every year?
A lot.
More than 100?
Maybe. I mean, we'll see 700 or 800 gunshot wounds this year if the year continues along as it has. 100 is not out of the question.
And how crazy is it to think about that? What if you guys weren't here,
It's, I think about that more than every once in a while, including right now as I think about this young kid that we just finished taking care of.
Are you able to go home at night and turn your brains off and not think about these kids that you're treating?
I don't think so. I mean, this affects everybody. It doesn't matter where you live. My neighborhood, everyone's been affected by this. Everybody knows somebody who's had a child injured as a result of a gun. Everyone knows a child who's suffered at the hands of a gun, and that has a long-standing impact on the family, but on the neighborhood, on the friends. It affects everyone, and it has a long-standing impact on the children themselves, because living in a city where violence is rampant is considered an adverse childhood experience. And there's a lot of studies that children who live in these areas, who suffer from these adverse childhood experiences, this has a long-standing impact not only for them as children, but as they grow up as adults. It will impact their health as well. So what we're doing is harming a whole generation of citizens, of children. It is just not right that the number one cause of death in children is gun violence. It's just not right that that's the number one cause. And we just need to decide what we can each do to try and make a difference to turn this around.
And you've been here a long time.
Yeah.
You said you don't think things have gotten any better over the years. Does it ever cross your mind, like, I can't do this anymore? Things aren't getting any better.
Yeah. I live a 10-minute walk from here. It's my city. When I go home, I haven't left it. I'm still here. And does it get discouraging? Of course it gets discouraging. It hasn't beaten me down enough to quit yet. Maybe one day, but not today.
I hope not. We're glad it hasn't. City officials, they're acknowledging the rise in juvenile gun violence this year. 10 children have been shot and killed, even more, dozens shot and survived. You're definitely seeing that there's a spike of more kids coming in.
No question. No question at all. And really hurt, not just a little hurt, really hurt.
Yeah. And you guys are seeing that too.
Absolutely. We're seeing kids who have been injured, whose siblings have been injured, coming in with stories, and we're working with families who have dealt with unimaginable losses and unimaginable pain. And families don't just bounce back and go on living the way they had been before when they're faced with such incredible losses. So families, their friends, their surrounding, their classmates, the waves of people who are affected from every individual act of violence is really astounding. And to think about all of those children who then have to go on and figure out their next steps forward is really an incredible feat of how much families in Baltimore have been able to overcome. Again, it speaks to how amazing Baltimore children really are, that they have faced so much and they are still such incredible kids that we see day in and day out. But I think it also speaks to how much work the adults around us all have to commit to, because we have to protect our children.
And there's families who are dealing with this more than once. I think we've heard from you before. You've had to tell a mother more than one time that a child.
Her second child, her only child, came in and died a year after her first child came in and died. It's crazy.
There's an emotional, psychological toll it's taking on these children and their families. How do you help them deal with those impacts that are definitely long-term?
We have to acknowledge that they're there to start with. So I am a strong advocate for seeking mental health services, therapy for kids who are affected either by witnessing violence, experiencing violence. It is absolutely essential to seek that mental health support. But also to recognize that kids will experience and reflect on violence differently as they age, because developmentally they might understand different implications as they grow up. So it is really important to keep re-engaging with therapy and continuing to offer and provide that support to children as they grow up.
But that support's not so easy to find.
Absolutely.
Well, absolutely. That's where people can help. If you're passionate about mental health, suicide prevention, we need a lot more support in those areas to support the kids and the families of gun violence. And I think Dr. Carter talked about a small step that we're trying to take here at the medical center, which is to help families and caregivers and teachers get comfortable asking about guns, talking about guns, making sure that you know where your children are playing and whether there's a gun in that house, and doing everything possible to make sure that if there is a gun, it's being safely locked and kept out of reach from kids so that we don't have these terrible accidents.
Why do you think Baltimore children feel that violence is often the answer? Because they're not only coming through your doors as victims of violence, they're often suspects as well.
I think that it really speaks to the normalization of violence in the city. And this is maybe a little off topic, but what other city has the major newspaper report homicides every week? I've never, when I got here, I said, this really?
Yeah. We track them. Everyone tracks them.
It's ingrained into the fabric of the city.
And for the past 8 years, there's been more than 300 homicides. That's a lot of lives lost.
A lot of lives.
And thousands more shot and survived.
If you look at the homicides, the day that Freddie Gray died, and they've never come back down.
Yeah. So what needs to change?
Well, I mean, this obviously needs to be a multifaceted approach. We just started the University of Maryland Violence Prevention Center with a very generous gift from the Sherman Foundation, which is fabulous. But we need to dig in and use evidence-based practices. It needs to be researched. We need to define the path forward, and we have to realize that it's not going to happen over a few months. This is a generation of change. It could be better next year, but it's not going to be gone. And we have to dig in for the long haul. We have to say we are committed, as you have heard from Dr. Carter and Dr. Czinn. We need to commit, and we can't be deterred. If we have a bad 6 months, dig in harder.
And a lot of that is starting with you guys. The Center for Violence Prevention is bedside intervention that happens. And I think I was surprised to hear that. I think a lot of people don't know that after they're victims here and you've treated them, they are getting intervention that hopefully helps. So talk to me about how that works and why it's important.
Well, to a certain extent, it's a little late, right? They've already been injured. We just don't want them to get injured again. We'd like to go to the front end of this and make it not happen. But certainly offering services to provide people with opportunity to not go back to the cycle. Violence begets violence begets violence. And our program is one of the few programs where there's randomized prospective data that says it works. You know how old that data is? Almost 20 years. We couldn't find anybody to fund the program. We paid for it out of our practice plan and hospital operations dollars. That's how we kept that program afloat. Now we have been able to get money, the ABLE Foundation. We've had a bunch of people. But for years and years and years, that was self-funded.
Do you feel that young people are receptive to what you're telling them, that life can change, it doesn't have to be this way?
I think that we have to demonstrate a commitment towards changing the structure that is set up that leads to some of the outcomes that we're seeing too. So I think that children know when we're giving them advice that doesn't necessarily fit within their lived reality. And so we have to also work on issues like food insecurity and housing insecurity and so many of the larger upstream issues that families are dealing with that demonstrate how to support them, how to get them able to concentrate and focus in school so that they can succeed in other ways, so that turning towards violence or having to be in situations where violence is more likely to happen is less likely to be their lived reality.
So just to support Dr. Carter, it's not simply can we remove guns or not. This is a public health issue. This is about neighborhoods, food insecurity, homes, obviously guns. And we need, I think, to address it as a public health issue, perhaps not to the same extent that COVID was a public health issue, but the impact of this on children is far worse than COVID was on children. This is a public health crisis, and we need help with making sure that there are opportunities in the neighborhoods for families to get healthy foods, get mental health services, make sure that every primary care practice is able to provide those services, and help people get comfortable asking and talking about guns, including the kids. They should feel comfortable when they go to a friend's house asking if the parents happen to, is there a gun in the house? And if they find a gun, they need to feel comfortable leaving that house. And those are small steps that I think will make a big difference. It won't extinguish the problem, but we've got to start small. We've got to do what we can. And every day is an opportunity for us to make a difference.
You both mentioned parents. I mean, how big of a role do they play in this?
Every parent wants their child to live a long, healthy life, to thrive, to grow. I have never once encountered a parent coming to me with a child who has experienced violence who wished that upon them in any way, or who didn't do everything in their power to find a different alternative. There are absolutely ways that we could be better supporting parents to be able to create scenarios where they can feel safe, to create after-school opportunities for their children to be able to participate in, that have more structure, that have more oversight, if they especially are not able to be the ones physically there to be watching their child during that time, to be able to have other alternatives that the community can provide that create that safe outlet. So yes, I believe that parents want all the best for their children, and I think that we as society need to do more to support parents because they can't do it all themselves.
If we sit down a year from now, what do you hope has changed? What is your hope for the children of Baltimore?
The number has to be less. It just has to be.
And significantly, right? Because
Yeah,
sometimes
two
we
doesn't
see,
cut it.
right. Sometimes we hear, oh, we're down by 10, whatever the number is, but it's still not a good number.
I'd like to see a grassroots effort by the citizens to do what you can to make sure guns are either not available or being kept in a very safe fashion. Mental health services to be much more available. Suicide prevention to be much more available. And try and make the neighborhoods a little safer for the families so that we can begin to normalize life for these kids.
Dr. Carter?
I think we need to make sure that our kids know that they're loved, that there are people around who want to protect them, and that they have alternatives for what they see in front of them. And so if in a year we've made a dent in the violence rates, that's amazing. If in a year we're looking at similar conversations, then what I hope is that at least kids are starting to understand where their options can be and what options are available to them outside of what they might see in terms of violence in surrounding neighborhoods, and finding ways to access those options.
Those are all my questions. Do any of you have anything that you think is important to add?
I think the recognition, Steve used the expression public health problem, is an incredibly important realization. This isn't a political fight. It's not a medical fight or set of issues. It's about the health of the public in Baltimore, and this is a huge problem for those people, for the citizens of the city, and the conversations need to be driven in that, with that framework. You know, I have the right to bear guns. I don't care. What I care about is getting to a place where there are fewer holes in a smaller number of people. Bring me a solution that leads to fewer holes in a smaller number of people. I'm all for it.
All right.
Well said.
Yeah. I think that was excellent, guys. I did want to ask about the Doesn't Kill to Ask campaign. I think we kind of touched on that,
Yes.
but can you talk to me a little bit about what that is and why it's important?
So we've come together to lend our support to what is a national campaign called Doesn't Kill to Ask, which is essentially a national strategy to destigmatize conversations related to guns present in the homes and gun storage in homes. Really, as parents, we have the right to know if our child is spending time in a home where a gun is located, and if so, to make sure that it's located in a safe way so that it's kept locked up with separate ammunition that is also locked up. I think we have done amazing work in public health of destigmatizing, reminding somebody who's giving our child a ride or carpool to make sure they have their car seat installed correctly and their seatbelt is on. We don't think twice about reminding someone to watch closely at the pool to make sure that someone is practicing proper water safety. But when it comes to gun safety, there is still a huge hesitation for many people to ask the questions that might be critical to keeping their child safe. So the more we can come together and promote the idea of having these conversations openly without stigma, I think the more we can continue to promote the very true understanding that guns have the capability of harming or killing your child, and we want to keep your child safe.
Well said. Okay. Thank you, guys. I know you're all very, very, very busy, so we really appreciate the honest conversation and
It's our pleasure.
all that
Come
you
back
do.
in a year, maybe it'll be better.
Yeah, I hope it's got to get better.
I hope so.
It's got to get better.